woman who discovered that the man she trusted most was actually a calculating predator, and she wasn't his first victim. What unfolds next will keep you on the edge of your seat as Rebecca fights not just for her own survival, but for the life of her unborn child. Stay with me for this incredible true crime-style thriller that proves sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one sleeping next to you. The wine cellar door clicked shut behind her. Then she heard the deadbolt slide. Rebecca Morrison stood frozen in the sudden silence. The heavy steel door had sealed with a pneumatic hiss that made her stomach drop. She reached for the handle with trembling fingers. Pushed against it. Nothing. "Jonathan?" Her voice echoed in the small space. "Jonathan? The door is stuck." Silence. The digital thermometer on the wall read -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Her breath formed small clouds as panic began to bloom in her chest like ice crystals. She tried the handle again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each attempt more desperate than the last. The door wouldn't budge. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself. "This cannot be happening." The silk dress Jonathan had insisted she wear clung to her 7 months pregnant belly, too thin for warmth, too elegant for a wine cellar. She should have questioned that, should have questioned a lot of things. The champagne bottles surrounded her like silent witnesses. Hundreds of them, thousands of dollars worth of celebration that would never come. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jonathan had sent her down here to retrieve champagne for their dinner party, their celebration of the pregnancy they'd tried for so long to achieve. 27 weeks. The baby kicked against her ribs as if sensing danger. "It's okay, little one," Becca said softly, placing both hands on her belly. "Mommy's going to figure this out." But even as she said the words, she noticed something that made her blood run colder than the air around her. Scratches on the inside of the door. Old ones. Deep gouges in the metal as if someone had clawed desperately at the surface. Someone else had been trapped here before. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a malfunction. This was planned. Her phone showed no signal bars. The reinforced walls of the wine cellar blocked everything. She was completely cut off from the outside world. The temperature seemed to drop another degree. Becca pressed her back against the cold wall and tried to think. Think past the panic. Think past the betrayal that was cutting deeper than the cold. Jonathan had planned this. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, the man who brought her breakfast in bed every morning and kissed her forehead when he thought she was sleeping. He had planned to lock her in a freezer. "Why?" she asked the empty air. "Why would you do this?" But even as she asked, fragments of the past week began falling into place like puzzle pieces. Jonathan's strange behavior, the dinner invitation he'd extended to no one, the way he'd insisted the staff take the evening off, his insistence that she wear the silk dress instead of the wool one she'd chosen. He'd been planning this for days. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for her own life now. She was fighting for 2 lives. Becca closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic would only make things worse. She needed to stay calm, stay rational, figure out a way to survive until someone found her, if anyone was coming to find her. The thought made her knees weak. Jonathan had told everyone she was visiting her mother in Chicago. He'd made sure no one would look for her tonight. No one would question her absence, except her mother didn't live in Chicago anymore. She'd moved to Phoenix 6 months ago, but Jonathan was the only one who knew that. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Becca opened her eyes and studied her prison more carefully. The wine cellar was about 8 feet by 12 feet, reinforced concrete walls, a single ventilation grate near the ceiling. The door was heavy steel with what looked like a restaurant-grade seal, built to keep temperature controlled, built to keep things in, or to keep people in. She noticed a small camera mounted in the corner near the ceiling. A red light blinked steadily. He was watching. Jonathan was somewhere in the house watching her realize what he'd done. "You sick bastard," she said to the camera. "You sick, twisted bastard." The words felt good, felt like fighting back, even if it was just words. She began moving around the small space looking for anything that might help. Behind the wine racks, she found something that made her heart race. A small crowbar, probably used for opening crates. It had been hidden behind a case of vintage Bordeaux. Someone else had tried to escape. Someone else had hidden tools and clawed at the door and failed. The scratches on the door suddenly made perfect sense. Becca gripped the crowbar with both hands. It was cold. Everything was cold. Everything. But it was something. It was hope. She wedged the flat end between the door and the frame and threw all her weight against it. The metal groaned but didn't give. She tried again. And again. Each attempt more desperate than the last. Nothing. The exertion made her heart race and her breathing rapid. Not good for the baby. Not good for either of them. She forced herself to stop and rest. That's when she heard it. Footsteps above her head. Someone was in the kitchen directly above the wine cellar. "Help!" she screamed, pounding on the ceiling with the crowbar. "Help me! I'm trapped down here!" The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, moving quickly toward the stairs that led to the cellar. Hope bloomed in her chest. Someone was coming. Someone had heard her. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. She could hear them just outside the door. "Help me," she called out. "The door's locked. I can't get out." She heard the sound of a key in a lock, the deadbolt sliding back. The door opened, and Jonathan stood there with a concerned expression on his face. Behind him stood 2 police officers. "Oh, thank God," one of the officers said. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Becca stared at her husband in confusion. "Jonathan? What's going on? Why were the police called?" Jonathan's expression was the picture of worried confusion. "Darling, you've been down here for 3 hours. We've been looking everywhere for you. I was so worried." 3 hours? Becca looked at her watch. It was 9:30. She'd come down here at 6:30 for the champagne. But that was only an hour ago, wasn't it? The cold, the fear. Time had become elastic. "Ma'am," the second officer said gently, "your husband called us when he couldn't find you. He said you'd been having some difficulties since the pregnancy started." "Difficulties?" Becca looked from the officer to Jonathan. "What kind of difficulties?" Jonathan's expression was patient, loving, concerned. The same expression he'd worn when he'd asked her to get the champagne. "Sweetheart, we've talked about this. The confusion, the memory issues. Dr. Harrison said it was normal, but that we needed to be careful." "I don't have memory issues," Becca said slowly. "I remember everything perfectly. You locked me in here. You planned this." The officers exchanged a look. "Ma'am," the first officer said carefully, "the door wasn't locked. It was just stuck. Your husband had to jimmy it open." Becca looked at the door. There was no padlock, no sign of the deadbolt she'd heard slide into place. Just a slightly warped door that might stick in cold weather. "But I heard the lock," she insisted. "I heard the deadbolt. Sometimes when doors swell in the cold, they can make all kinds of noises," the second officer said kindly. "And being pregnant can make everything seem more intense." Jonathan moved to her side and wrapped his arms around her. "Let's get you upstairs where it's warm. You're freezing." She was freezing. Her lips felt numb. Her fingers could barely grip the crowbar. But she remembered what she'd heard. She remembered the planning, the deliberate choices. Didn't she? As they climbed the stairs from the wine cellar, Becca's mind raced. The warm air of the main house hit her like a wall, making her realize just how cold she'd become. But the physical warmth did nothing to ease the chill of confusion that had settled in her bones. "Thank you, officers," Jonathan said as they reached the kitchen. "I'm sorry to have worried you over nothing." "Not a problem, Mr. Whitmore," the first officer replied. "Pregnancy can be tough. My wife had some similar issues when she was expecting our daughter." "Similar issues?" Like they thought she was losing her mind. "Ma'am," the second officer said to Becca, "do you remember how you got trapped in the cellar?" Becca wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process what had just happened. "Jonathan asked me to get champagne for dinner. When I went downstairs, the door closed behind me and wouldn't open." "And what did you do then?" "I tried to open it. I called for help. I found a crowbar and tried to pry it open." The officers nodded. Nothing unusual in her story. Nothing that suggested anything other than a pregnant woman getting confused and panicked when trapped in a cold room. But she knew what she'd heard. The deadbolt sliding home. The deliberate click of a lock engaging. "Sweetheart," Jonathan said, rubbing her arms to warm them. "Why don't you go upstairs and take a hot bath? I'll make you some tea." The suggestion sounded perfect. She was so cold she could barely think straight. A hot bath would help her process what had happened. "That sounds good," she said quietly. After the officers left, Jonathan walked her upstairs to their master suite. The bathroom was enormous, with a jetted tub that could easily fit 2 people. Jonathan started the water running and added lavender bath salts. "I was so scared when I couldn't find you," he said, testing the water temperature. "I looked everywhere. Called your mother. Called your sister. No one had heard from you." Called her mother. The mother who lived in Phoenix, not Chicago. "You called my mom?" Becca asked carefully. "Of course. I thought maybe you'd gone over there without telling me. You know how forgetful you've been lately." There it was again. The suggestion that she was forgetful, confused, having issues. "I haven't been forgetful," she said. Jonathan's expression was patient, understanding. "Darling, last week you couldn't remember where you put your car keys. The week before that, you forgot about your doctor's appointment. Dr. Harrison said the hormones can affect memory and judgment." Had those things happened? Becca tried to remember. The car keys incident felt fuzzy. The doctor's appointment. She remembered being confused about the date, but forgetting things was different from what had happened tonight. Tonight wasn't about memory. Tonight was about being deliberately trapped. "Jonathan, I heard the deadbolt," she said firmly. "I heard you lock the door." His expression didn't change. Still patient, still concerned. "Sweetheart, there is no deadbolt on the wine cellar door. There never has been. It just sticks sometimes when the temperature changes." "Then explain the scratches inside the door." "Old scratches, like someone was trying to claw their way out." For just a moment, something flickered across Jonathan's face, too quick to identify. Then it was gone, replaced by the same concerned expression. "What scratches?" he asked. "On the inside of the door, deep gouges in the metal." "Becca, there are no scratches on that door. I just looked at it when I opened it for you." She stared at him. Either she was going crazy or he was lying. Those were the only 2 possibilities. "Check the water," Jonathan said gently. "You don't want it too hot for the baby." The baby, 27 weeks along, still viable but vulnerable, still dependent on her body temperature, her stress levels, her health. Becca tested the water. It was perfect, like everything Jonathan did. Perfect temperature, perfect timing, perfect execution. "I'll leave you to relax," he said, kissing her forehead. "Call if you need anything." After he left, Becca sank into the hot water and tried to make sense of what had happened. The warmth felt incredible after the freezing cellar, but it also made her realize just how close she'd come to hypothermia. 20 minutes in a negative 10-degree room while pregnant. That was dangerous, potentially fatal. But if it had been an accident, why hadn't Jonathan looked for her sooner? He'd said 3 hours, but her watch said only 1 hour had passed, which was right. She looked at her phone. 9:45. She'd gone downstairs at 6:30. That was 3 hours and 15 minutes. Her watch had stopped. The cold had killed the battery, so Jonathan was right about the time. But that meant she'd been trapped for over 3 hours. Why had it taken him so long to look for her? As the warm water loosened the tension in her muscles, other details from the evening began to surface. Jonathan's insistence that she wear the silk dress instead of the wool one. The way he'd sent all the staff home early, even Maria, who usually stayed late on Friday nights. The dinner party he'd mentioned that apparently didn't exist. And something else. Something that made her blood run cold despite the hot bath. This morning, when she'd gone to her jewelry box to get her grandmother's earrings, she'd noticed that her passport was missing. She'd mentioned it to Jonathan, and he'd said he'd moved it to the safe for security. But why would he move just her passport? His was still in the jewelry box, unless he was planning something that required her to be unable to travel. Becca's hands moved instinctively to her belly. The baby was moving normally now, reassured by the warmth and her slower heart rate. But the feeling of unease was growing stronger. She tried to remember exactly what had happened in the wine cellar. Every detail, every sound. The door closing, the pneumatic hiss of the seal, the clicking sound that she'd interpreted as a deadbolt. But what if it wasn't a deadbolt? What if it was something else? Something that could be removed before the police arrived. A padlock, maybe. Something external that could be quickly unlocked and hidden. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became. Jonathan had locked her in that cellar. He'd planned it carefully, and when someone had come to investigate, he'd removed the evidence and called the police himself to establish his cover story. But who had come to investigate? Someone had heard her calling for help. Someone had brought the police. Maria. It had to be Maria. The chef always forgot something and came back after her shift. Her car keys, her phone, her sweater. Something. Maria had heard her and called for help, which meant Maria might be able to confirm what really happened. Becca finished her bath quickly and got dressed in warm pajamas. When she went downstairs, she found Jonathan in his study, working on his laptop. "Feeling better?" he asked without looking up. "Much better. Thank you for taking care of me." Now she looked at him carefully. Really looked. Jonathan was 45, 15 years older than her, successful beyond measure. His tech company had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. When they'd met 3 years ago, she'd been flattered by his attention. A man who could have anyone choosing her, a mid-level marketing executive with student loans and a tiny apartment. He'd swept her off her feet. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to Napa, a proposal with a ring that cost more than she'd made in 2 years. The fairytale wedding, the beautiful house, the staff to take care of everything. The gradual transition from working woman to pampered wife. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped making her own decisions, stopped having her own money, stopped maintaining her own friendships. When had that happened? When had she become so dependent on him for everything? "Jonathan," she said carefully, "what happened to my credit cards?" He looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "My personal credit cards, the ones I had before we got married. What happened to them?" "We consolidated everything, remember? It was easier to manage our finances together, more efficient. But I don't have access to any accounts." His expression remained patient. "Darling, you have access to everything. You just need to ask me." Need to ask him. For her own money, for her own freedom. "I'd like to have my own account again," she said. "Just a small one, for personal expenses." "Of course. We can set that up next week. Dr. Harrison said it might be good for you to have more independence." Dr. Harrison again. The psychiatrist she didn't remember choosing. The one who apparently thought she was having memory and judgment issues. "When did I start seeing Dr. Harrison?" she asked. "About 6 weeks ago, after the incident with the car." The incident with the car. Another thing she couldn't quite remember clearly. "Remind me what happened with the car." Jonathan's fingers paused over the keyboard. "You don't remember? You called me from the grocery store parking lot, crying. You said you couldn't remember how to get home. I had to come pick you up." That did sound familiar, but the details were hazy, like looking at something through fog. "And that's when you decided I needed to see a psychiatrist?" "I was worried about you, about the baby. Pregnancy can cause all kinds of hormonal changes that affect thinking and memory." Everything he said sounded reasonable, caring, concerned. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being managed, that every conversation was carefully steered in a direction he wanted it to go. "I'm going to call Maria," she said suddenly. "I want to thank her for hearing me tonight." "Maria?" Jonathan looked confused. "What does Maria have to do with anything? She's the one who heard me calling for help, isn't she? She's the one who called the police." Jonathan shook his head slowly. "No, sweetheart, I'm the one who called the police. When I came home and couldn't find you. But someone heard me. Someone knew I was trapped. I heard you when I came down to look for you. That's how I found you." Another piece that didn't fit. She'd been calling for help for 3 hours. Why had he only heard her at the end? Unless he'd been listening the whole time. Unless he'd been waiting for her to reach a certain level of hypothermia before he rescued her. The thought was so horrifying that she couldn't voice it. Instead, she said, "I think I'll go to bed early tonight. I'm still feeling cold." "Good idea. I'll be up soon." As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Becca's mind was spinning. Either she was having some kind of mental breakdown, or her husband had just tried to kill her, and she was starting to believe it was the latter. Maria Santos had worked for the Whitmore family for 2 years, long enough to know the rhythms of the house, long enough to recognize when something was wrong. She'd left at 6:30 that evening, just like Mr. Whitmore had requested. All the staff were to leave early. No dinner service needed. No cleanup required. Just lock up and go. But 20 minutes later, sitting in her small apartment above the garage at her cousin's house, Maria realized she'd left her car keys on the kitchen counter. Again. It was becoming a habit. Her mind was always on the next day's menu, the grocery list, the special dietary requirements Mrs. Whitmore had developed since the pregnancy. Details scattered her thoughts until she forgot the basics. The keys to her 15-year-old Honda weren't worth much, but they were her only way to get to her second job in the morning. The breakfast shift at the diner downtown started at 5 a.m. She walked back across the estate grounds in the gathering darkness. The main house was lit up like always, but something felt different, empty. Usually there was music playing, or the sound of the television from Mr. Whitmore's study. Tonight there was silence. Maria used her staff key to enter through the kitchen door. Her keys were exactly where she'd left them, next to the espresso machine. As she picked them up, she heard something that made her freeze. A sound from below, from the direction of the wine cellar. Banging, like someone hitting something metal. Then a voice, muffled but desperate. "Help! Help me! I'm trapped down here!" Maria's blood went cold. That was Mrs. Whitmore's voice. But Mr. Whitmore had said his wife was visiting her mother in Chicago. He'd been very specific about that when he dismissed the staff early. "Ma'am?" Maria called out, moving toward the cellar stairs. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The banging stopped, then resumed more frantically. "Help me! The door's locked! I can't get out!" Maria ran down the stairs to the wine cellar. The heavy steel door was closed, and there was a padlock on the outside latch. A padlock that had never been there before. She tried to lift it, but it was secure, locked tight. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm here. I'm going to get help." "Maria? Maria, is that you?" "Oh, thank God. Call the police. Call 911. "What happened? How did you get locked in there?" "Jonathan locked me in. He planned this." "Please, Maria, I'm so cold. The baby." Maria's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Mrs. Whitmore was 7 months pregnant. Being trapped in the wine cellar, where the temperature was kept just above freezing, could kill her, could kill them both. She started to dial 911, then stopped. What if she was wrong? What if there was some explanation? Mr. Whitmore was a powerful man, a respected member of the community. If she called the police and accused him of locking up his pregnant wife, her immigration status was complicated. She had a work visa, but it was tied to her employment with the Whitmores. If she lost this job, she'd have to leave the country. But Mrs. Whitmore was trapped. Mrs. Whitmore and her baby could die. Maria hit the call button. 911, what's your emergency? I need help. My employer's wife is trapped in a wine cellar. She's pregnant and she's very cold. What's the address? Maria gave the address of the Whitmore estate. Is she injured? I don't know. She says she's cold. The room is very cold and she's been in there for I don't know how long. We're sending units now. Are you able to get her out? There's a padlock on the door. I don't have a key. Stay on the line with me. Keep talking to her. Let her know help is coming. Maria knelt by the door. Mrs. Whitmore, the police are coming. They'll be here soon. Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. Mrs. Whitmore's voice sounded weak, tired. How long had she been in there? When did this happen? Maria asked through the door. Jonathan sent me down here to get champagne at 6:30. The door closed and I couldn't get out. I heard him lock it. 6:30. That was exactly when Maria had left. Mr. Whitmore had waited until all the staff were gone. Where is Mr. Whitmore now? I don't know. Maria, he planned this. He's been acting strange all week, sending everyone away, making me wear specific clothes, moving my passport. Moving her passport? Why would he do that? Unless he was planning something that required his wife to be unable to travel, or unable to do anything at all. The sound of sirens interrupted Maria's thoughts. Red and blue lights flashed through the small basement windows. They're here, Maria called through the door. The police are here. Footsteps pounded down the cellar stairs. 2 officers appeared, followed by paramedics. What's the situation? The first officer asked. Mrs. Whitmore is locked inside the wine cellar, Maria said, pointing to the padlocked door. She's been in there since 6:30. She's 7 months pregnant. The officer examined the padlock. This is a serious lock. Industrial grade. Someone wanted to make sure this door stayed closed. The second officer was already on his radio, calling for more units and requesting tools to cut the lock. "Ma'am," the first officer called through the door. "This is Officer Martinez with the police department. We're going to get you out of there. Are you injured?" "I'm very cold, Ibor," came the weak reply. "I can't feel my fingers. The baby isn't moving as much." The paramedics moved closer to the door. "We need to get her out now," one of them said. "Hypothermia during pregnancy can cause serious complications." "Where's her husband?" Officer Martinez asked Maria. "I don't know. He told all the staff to leave early tonight. He said Mrs. Whitmore was visiting her mother in Chicago." The officers exchanged a look. "But she's obviously not in Chicago," the second officer said. "She's locked in her own wine cellar." "Cut the lock," Officer Martinez ordered. As the paramedics worked on the padlock with bolt cutters, Maria heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy footsteps moving quickly toward the cellar stairs. Mr. Whitmore appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking concerned and confused. "Officers, what's going on? I just got home and saw the police cars." "Mr. Whitmore?" Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Your wife is locked in your wine cellar. This young woman called for help." Mr. Whitmore's expression shifted to shock. "Locked in the cellar? That's impossible. Rebecca's visiting her mother in Chicago." "Sir, we can hear her talking through the door. She's definitely in there." Mr. Whitmore moved toward the door. "Rebecca? Sweetheart, what are you doing down there?" "Jonathan, you know exactly what I'm doing down here," came the muffled reply. "You locked me in here." Mr. Whitmore turned to the officers with a troubled expression. "Officers, I need to tell you something. My wife has been having some difficulties since the pregnancy began. Memory issues, confusion. She's been seeing a psychiatrist." "What kind of difficulties?" Officer Martinez asked. "Forgetting things. Getting lost. Last week she called me from a parking lot, crying, because she couldn't remember how to get home. Her doctor said the pregnancy hormones can affect cognitive function." Maria stared at Mr. Whitmore. He was lying. She'd never seen Mrs. Whitmore act confused or forgetful. Mrs. Whitmore was sharp, organized, always knew exactly what was happening in the house. But who would believe the word of an immigrant chef against a billionaire? The paramedics finally cut through the padlock. As the door swung open, Maria saw Mrs. Whitmore stumble out, her skin pale and her lips blue from cold. "Rebecca!" Mr. Whitmore rushed to her side. "What happened? How did you get trapped down there?" Mrs. Whitmore looked at her husband with an expression Maria had never seen before. Fear mixed with anger and a terrible understanding. "You know exactly how I got trapped down there," she said quietly. But as the paramedics wrapped her in blankets and checked her vital signs, Maria noticed something that made her stomach drop. The padlock that had secured the door was gone. One of the officers had picked it up and put it in an evidence bag, but she could see Mr. Whitmore watching to see where it went. He was already planning how to explain it away, and Maria realized that this was far from over. "My wife has been having delusions since the pregnancy started," Jonathan Whitmore said, his voice calm and reasonable as he spoke to Detective Sarah Coleman, who had arrived on scene 20 minutes after the initial response. Becca sat in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in blankets, while paramedics monitored her core temperature. She could hear every word of her husband's performance, and that's exactly what it was. A carefully crafted performance designed to make her look unstable. "What kind of delusions?" Detective Coleman asked. She was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "She's been convinced that people are following her, that I've been moving her things, that I'm trying to control her," Jonathan replied, running a hand through his hair in what appeared to be genuine distress. "Her psychiatrist said it's not uncommon. Pregnancy hormones can cause paranoid ideation." "And this psychiatrist is?" "Dr. Margaret Harrison. She's been treating Rebecca for about 6 weeks now." Becca wanted to scream. She'd never chosen Dr. Harrison. She'd been railroaded into seeing her after the incident with the car that she still couldn't remember clearly. Detective Coleman made notes in a small notebook. "Tell me about tonight. When did you last see your wife?" "Around 5:30. I was in my study working. Rebecca said she was going to take a nap before dinner. When I went to check on her at 8:30, she wasn't in our bedroom. I searched the house, called her mother, her sister. Nobody had heard from her. What made you think to look in the wine cellar?" Jonathan's expression was perfect. Concerned husband worried sick about his pregnant wife. I'd searched everywhere else. The cellar was the last place I could think to look. And the door was locked? Not locked, stuck. It sticks sometimes when the humidity changes. I had to jimmy it open. Becca closed her eyes in frustration. He'd removed the padlock before calling the police, probably hidden it somewhere they'd never find it. Now it was his word against hers, and he'd spent weeks establishing her as mentally unstable. "Ma'am," Detective Coleman approached the ambulance. "I'm Detective Coleman. How are you feeling?" "Better, warmer." Becca's voice was still shaky from the cold and the adrenaline. "Detective, my husband locked me in that cellar. There was a padlock on the outside of the door." "Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't see any padlock when we arrived. Because he removed it before you got here. He planned this whole thing." Detective Coleman's expression was professionally neutral. "Why do you think your husband would want to harm you?" It was the question Becca couldn't answer. Why would Jonathan want to hurt her? What did he gain from her death? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know what happened. I'm not delusional. I'm not confused. He sent all the staff away, lured me down to the cellar, and locked me in." "The chef found you," Detective Coleman said. "Maria Santos. She says she heard you calling for help." Hope flared in Becca's chest. Maria had heard her. Maria could confirm that there had been a padlock. "Yes, Maria heard me. She saw the padlock. She can tell you what really happened." Detective Coleman made more notes. "We'll be speaking with Miss Santos." 20 feet away, another officer was indeed speaking with Maria. But Becca could see the chef's nervous body language, the way she kept glancing at Jonathan, the way her hands shook as she answered questions. Maria was scared, and Becca couldn't blame her. "Detective," Jonathan approached with his phone in his hand, "I've been in contact with my wife's psychiatrist. Dr. Harrison said she's had episodes like this before. False memories of being trapped or locked up." "Episodes like this before?" Becca stared at her husband. "What episodes? When?" "Last month, when you locked yourself in the bathroom and insisted I'd trapped you in there. 2 weeks ago, when you called me from the grocery store, convinced that someone was following you." Becca's memory of those events was fuzzy. Had they really happened the way he was describing them? "Dr. Harrison is willing to come down and evaluate Rebecca tonight," Jonathan continued. "She's very concerned about this escalation." "That won't be necessary," Detective Coleman said. "Mrs. Whitmore needs medical evaluation first." The paramedic looked up from checking Becca's blood pressure. "Her vitals are stable now, but we need to get her to the hospital for observation. Hypothermia during pregnancy requires monitoring." "I'll follow you there," Jonathan said, moving toward Becca with what looked like genuine concern. "No," Becca said quickly. "I don't want him there." Everyone looked at her. Jonathan's expression shifted to hurt confusion. "Sweetheart, you're not thinking clearly. You've been through a trauma. I need to be there to make sure you and the baby are okay." "I don't want you there," Becca repeated, louder this time. Detective Coleman intervened. "Mrs. Whitmore has the right to refuse visitors at the hospital. We can arrange for a family member to be called if she prefers." "My mother," Becca said immediately. "Call my mother." "Rebecca, your mother is in Chicago," Jonathan said gently. "Remember? That's where you thought you were going tonight." "My mother lives in Phoenix," Becca said firmly. "She moved there 6 months ago." Jonathan's expression became patient, understanding, the look of a man dealing with someone who was clearly confused. "Darling, your mother moved back to Chicago 3 months ago, after your father's job transfer. We helped her pack, remember?" Did she remember that? The memory felt real but distant, like something seen through thick glass. "Detective Coleman," Jonathan continued, "this is exactly what Dr. Harrison was talking about. The confusion, the memory gaps, the paranoid ideation. Rebecca needs psychiatric evaluation along with medical treatment." Becca felt the walls closing in around her. Every time she stated a fact, Jonathan countered with another version that sounded equally plausible. And he had documentation, a psychiatrist who would back up his claims, a history of supposed episodes that she couldn't clearly remember. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Coleman said quietly, "is there anyone else you'd like us to call? A friend? Another family member?" Becca tried to think. Who was left in her life who wasn't connected to Jonathan? Over the past 3 years, she'd gradually lost touch with most of her college friends, her work colleagues from before the marriage, the women from her book club. Jonathan had never forbidden her from seeing them. He just made it easier not to. Always had something planned when they invited her out. Always needed her for something important when she tried to make plans. Amanda, she said suddenly. Amanda Cross. She's my oldest friend. Amanda's in Europe, Jonathan said immediately. The architectural tour, remember? She won't be back for 2 weeks. Another memory that felt real but uncertain. Had Amanda told her about a European trip? I can check on that, Detective Coleman said, making another note. As they prepared to transport Becca to the hospital, she caught sight of Maria standing by the kitchen door. The young woman looked terrified, but when their eyes met, Maria nodded almost imperceptibly. Maria knew. Maria had seen the padlock. Maria knew she was telling the truth. But would Maria be brave enough to say so? And would anyone believe her if she did? As the ambulance pulled away from the estate, Becca pressed her hands to her belly and tried to stay calm for the baby's sake. But her mind was racing. Jonathan had orchestrated this entire evening. He'd planned it carefully, down to establishing her mental instability with a psychiatrist. He'd isolated her from her support system and created a scenario where her word meant nothing against his. But why? What did he gain from her death? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? The emergency room at Mercy General was a blur of bright lights and efficient movement. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the attending physician, was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands that had delivered hundreds of babies over her career. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Hayes, she said as the nurses settled Becca into a bed in the maternity ward. How are you feeling? Warmer, Becca replied, but scared. Dr. Hayes checked her chart. Your core temperature when you arrived was 94 degrees. That's mild hypothermia. Not immediately life-threatening, but concerning during pregnancy. Is the baby okay? Let's check. Dr. Hayes moved the ultrasound wand over Becca's belly. The familiar sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong and steady. She sounds good, Dr. Hayes said with a smile. Heart rate is normal. Movement looks good. You got out of that cold room just in time. Relief flooded through Becca. Whatever Jonathan had planned, he hadn't succeeded. Yet. Dr. Hayes, Becca said carefully, my husband will probably try to visit. He'll tell you that I'm having psychiatric problems, that I'm delusional. I need you to know that's not true. Dr. Hayes sat down in the chair beside the bed. Tell me what happened tonight. Becca told her everything. The planned dinner party that didn't exist. The staff being sent home early. The silk dress instead of wool. The padlock on the wine cellar door that had mysteriously disappeared. Dr. Hayes listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. Mrs. Whitmore, have you experienced any physical violence from your husband? No, nothing like that. But, Becca paused, trying to find the words, he controls everything. My money, my friends, where I go, what I wear. I didn't realize how complete it was until tonight. That's called coercive control, Dr. Hayes said gently. It's a form of domestic abuse. And what happened tonight, if it happened the way you describe it, was attempted murder. The words hung in the air between them. Attempted murder of her and her unborn child. But I can't prove it, Becca said. He's too smart. He planned too well. Smart abusers often are excellent at covering their tracks, Dr. Hayes said, but they also tend to escalate. If he tried once, he'll try again. Before Becca could respond, there was a knock on the door. A nurse poked her head in. Mrs. Whitmore, there's a police detective here to see you. Detective Coleman. Send her in, Becca said. Detective Coleman entered, followed by a woman Becca didn't recognize. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled gray hair and an expensive suit. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said, this is Dr. Margaret Harrison, your psychiatrist. Dr. Harrison. The woman Jonathan claimed she'd been seeing for 6 weeks. Becca studied her face, searching for any spark of recognition. Nothing. I'm sorry, Becca said politely, but I don't know you. Dr. Harrison's expression was professionally sympathetic. Rebecca, we've discussed this. The pregnancy hormones have been affecting your memory. We've had several sessions together. When? Where? What did we talk about? Our last session was 3 days ago in my office on Maple Street. We discussed your increasing paranoid ideation and your fears about your husband's motives. Becca looked from Dr. Harrison to Detective Coleman to Dr. Hayes. All three women were watching her carefully, waiting to see if she would remember. She didn't. She had no memory of ever seeing this woman before in her life. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Harrison continued, you've been experiencing what we call false memory syndrome. Your mind creates elaborate scenarios that feel completely real to you, but that never actually happened. You're lying, Becca said flatly. I've never met you before. Rebecca, this is exactly what we've been working on. The inability to distinguish between false memories and real ones. It's becoming more severe as your pregnancy progresses. Dr. Hayes spoke up. Dr. Harrison, do you have documentation of these sessions? Insurance billing? Appointment records? Of course. Dr. Harrison pulled out her phone. I can have my office send over her complete file. Becca felt panic rising in her chest. If Dr. Harrison had documentation, if there were insurance records, appointment schedules, billing statements, then maybe she really was losing her mind. Maybe she had locked herself in the wine cellar somehow. Maybe the padlock was a delusion. Maybe Jonathan really was the concerned husband he appeared to be. But even as the doubt crept in, something inside her rebelled against it. She knew what she'd experienced. She knew what she'd heard and seen and felt. Dr. Harrison, Detective Coleman said, in your professional opinion, could Mrs. Whitmore have created the scenario she described? The padlock? The deliberate trapping? Absolutely. False memory syndrome can create incredibly detailed scenarios. The mind fills in gaps with information that feels completely real to the patient. But she wasn't alone, Detective Coleman said. The chef, Maria Santos, confirms that she heard Mrs. Whitmore calling for help from inside a locked room. Maria Santos is an undocumented immigrant, Dr. Harrison said smoothly. She's terrified of being deported. She'll say whatever she thinks the authorities want to hear. That wasn't true. Maria had a work visa. Becca knew because she'd helped Maria with the paperwork renewal last year. Maria has legal status, Becca said. She's not undocumented. Dr. Harrison's expression didn't change. Rebecca, you're confused. Maria's visa expired 8 months ago. She's been working illegally since then. Another fact that sounded plausible but felt wrong. How could Becca know for certain? Jonathan handled all the household staff paperwork. I'd like to speak with Maria, Dr. Hayes said. Is she still at the house? I believe so, Detective Coleman said. Mr. Whitmore asked her to stay to answer questions. Asked her to stay, or ordered her to stay. And what was Jonathan telling Maria while they spoke? What threats was he making? What promises? Dr. Harrison, Becca said suddenly, what's my mother's address? The question seemed to catch the psychiatrist off guard. I'm sorry? My mother. Where does she live? You said you've been treating me for 6 weeks. I would have mentioned my mother. Where does she live? Dr. Harrison recovered smoothly. Chicago. She moved back there 3 months ago. No, Becca said firmly. She lives in Phoenix. She moved there 6 months ago after the divorce. Rebecca, your parents aren't divorced. They've been married for 32 years. The room seemed to spin. Becca gripped the bed rails, trying to anchor herself to something solid. Her parents divorced 18 months ago. Her mother had moved to Phoenix to be near her sister. Her father had moved to a condo downtown, hadn't they? The memories felt real but distant, like looking at old photographs through frosted glass. I need to call my mother, Becca said. I need to talk to her directly. Of course, Dr. Hayes said. Do you have her number? Becca reached for her phone, then realized she didn't know the number by heart. It was programmed into her contacts. But when she opened her contacts, there was no entry for her mother. No entry for her father. No entries for any of her college friends or former coworkers. Where are my contacts? She asked, staring at the nearly empty list. You deleted them, Dr. Harrison said gently, during one of your episodes last week. You were convinced that someone was monitoring your phone. You deleted everything. Had she done that? The action felt like something she might do if she thought she was being watched. but she had no memory of doing it. Can we call information? Becca asked Dr. Hayes. Get my mother's number? What's her name? Grace Morrison, but I don't know if she kept her married name after the divorce. Rebecca, Dr. Harrison interrupted. Your parents aren't divorced. Your mother's name is Grace Morrison. She lives in Chicago with your father. Detective Coleman was watching this exchange with growing interest. Mrs. Whitmore, is there anyone else you can call? Someone who would know your mother's current information? Becca thought desperately. Who was left in her life who wasn't filtered through Jonathan? My sister, she said suddenly. Jenny. She lives in California. You don't have a sister, Dr. Harrison said quietly. You're an only child. The words hit Becca like a physical blow. She had a sister. Jenny was 2 years younger, a teacher in San Diego. They talked every week, didn't they? As she tried to summon specific memories of conversations with Jenny, of visits, of childhood experiences together, she found only vague impressions, feelings without details, emotions without context. I need to see my medical records, Becca said, her voice shaking. From before I started seeing you, Dr. Harrison, from my regular doctor. That's a good idea, Dr. Hayes said. I can request them in the morning. But Becca could see the doubt in Dr. Hayes' eyes now, the careful, professional distance that doctors maintained when they weren't sure if their patient was reliable. If she couldn't trust her own memories, if her own psychiatrist was documenting her delusions, if there were no friends or family she could call to verify her version of reality, then how could she convince anyone that her husband had tried to kill her? How could she convince herself? As if summoned by her despair, Jonathan appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard, worried, like a man who'd spent hours fearing for his wife's life. Sweetheart, he said, moving to her bedside. How are you feeling? Looking at him now, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, hearing the love in his voice, Becca felt her certainty wavering. Maybe she really was losing her mind. Maybe the woman lying in the hospital bed, surrounded by people trying to help her, was the delusional one. And maybe the man holding her hand was exactly what he appeared to be, a husband desperate to save his wife from her own fractured mind. Maria Santos sat in the kitchen of the Whitmore estate, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Detective Coleman sat across from her at the breakfast bar, notebook open, pen ready. Mr. Whitmore was in his study, making phone calls about his wife's condition. At least that's what he'd told Maria. But she could hear the low murmur of his voice through the closed door, and something about the tone made her uneasy. Miss Santos, Detective Coleman said, tell me exactly what you saw tonight. Maria chose her words carefully. Her English was good, but not perfect, and she knew that every word mattered now. I came back for my keys, she said. I heard Mrs. Whitmore calling for help from the wine cellar. What did you see when you went downstairs? The door was closed. There was a padlock on the outside. You're certain it was a padlock? Yes, a big one. Silver metal, very strong. Detective Coleman made notes. Had you seen that padlock before? Never. We don't lock the wine cellar. There's no reason. What did you do then? I called 911. Mrs. Whitmore told me to call 911. Did she say anything else? Maria hesitated. This was the dangerous part, the part that could get her in serious trouble. She said Mr. Whitmore locked her in there. She said he planned it. Detective Coleman looked up from her notebook. Those were her exact words. She said Jonathan locked me in. He planned this. And what happened next? Mr. Whitmore came home. He acted surprised to see the police. Acted surprised, Maria nodded. Like he was performing, like in the movies. Before Detective Coleman could ask another question, Mr. Whitmore emerged from his study. His expression was grave. Detective, he said, I've just spoken with Dr. Harrison. She's very concerned about Rebecca's deteriorating condition. Mr. Whitmore, we're just finishing up with Mrs. Santos. Of course. Mr. Whitmore's eyes met Maria's across the kitchen. The look lasted only a second, but the message was clear. Be careful what you say. Ms. Santos, Detective Coleman continued, you mentioned that Mrs. Whitmore seemed to think her husband had deliberately locked her in the cellar. Did you believe that? Maria felt Mr. Whitmore's presence like a weight on her shoulders. He was standing behind Detective Coleman, where the detective couldn't see his face, but Maria could see it, could see the warning in his eyes. Maria started, then stopped. She thought about her work visa, about her job, about her cousin Michael, who was a police officer but couldn't help her if she crossed someone as powerful as Jonathan Whitmore. She thought about her family back in El Salvador, who depended on the money she sent home every month. But she also thought about Mrs. Whitmore, who had always treated her with kindness and respect, who had helped her with her visa paperwork, who had given her a generous bonus when Maria's father had been sick. Mrs. Whitmore, who was 7 months pregnant and had nearly died tonight. Mrs. Whitmore was very scared, Maria said carefully. She believed someone had locked her in the cellar on purpose. But what did you believe? Detective Coleman pressed. Maria looked directly at Mr. Whitmore as she answered. I believed her. Something flickered across Mr. Whitmore's face. Anger quickly suppressed. Maria, he said gently, you know how confused Rebecca has been lately. Just last week she forgot to pay you, remember? You had to remind her twice. That wasn't true. Mrs. Whitmore had never forgotten to pay her. Mr. Whitmore handled all the payroll through his business manager, but Detective Coleman was writing it down. And the incident with the grocery shopping, Mr. Whitmore continued, when Rebecca bought food for people who don't exist. Remember how worried you were about her? Also not true, but Maria could see how it would sound to an outsider, an employer concerned about his wife's mental health, a loyal employee confirming the details. Mr. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said, can you walk me through the timeline of this evening? When did you last see your wife? Around 5:30. I was in my study working on some contracts. Rebecca said she was going to rest before dinner. What dinner? Mr. Whitmore looked confused. I'm sorry. You mentioned dinner. Were you expecting guests? No, just the two of us. Rebecca's been craving Italian food lately, so I thought I'd cook for her. Maria stared at him. Mr. Whitmore hadn't cooked a meal in the 2 years she'd worked here. That was her job. When did you realize she was missing? Detective Coleman asked. Around 8:30. I went upstairs to check on her, and she wasn't there. I searched the house, called her family, her friends. Nobody had heard from her. And you didn't think to check the wine cellar until much later? It was the last place I thought to look. Why would Rebecca be in the wine cellar? It was a good question. Why would Mrs. Whitmore be in the wine cellar? Mr. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said, your wife claims you sent her to the cellar to retrieve champagne. Champagne? Mr. Whitmore's confusion appeared genuine. Detective, we have a wine refrigerator right here in the kitchen. Why would I send her to the cellar for champagne? He gestured to the built-in wine fridge next to the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Maria could see several bottles of champagne through the glass door. It was a good point, a damning point. Why would he send his pregnant wife to the cold cellar when there was champagne readily available in the kitchen? Unless the point wasn't to get champagne. Unless the point was to get her into the cellar. Detective Coleman, Mr. Whitmore said, I need to share something with you. Something Dr. Harrison told me about Rebecca's condition. Go ahead. She's been having what Dr. Harrison calls constructed memories. Elaborate scenarios that feel completely real to her, but that never actually happened. The incident in the cellar tonight fits the pattern perfectly. Maria wanted to scream. She had seen the padlock. She had heard Mrs. Whitmore's desperate calls for help. This wasn't a constructed memory. This was attempted murder. But who would believe her word against his? Miss Santos, Detective Coleman turned back to her. You mentioned that you saw a padlock on the cellar door. Can you describe it? Silver metal, about this big. Maria held up her hands to show the size. Very heavy, very strong. And where is this padlock now? Maria looked at Mr. Whitmore. I don't know. When the police opened the door, it was gone. Gone? Someone removed it before you arrived. Miss Santos, Mr. Whitmore said gently, are you certain you saw a padlock? It was dark. You were frightened for Rebecca. Could it have been something else? A latch that looked like a lock? No, Maria said firmly. It was a padlock. I tried to lift it, but it was locked tight. Mr. Whitmore's expression became sympathetic, understanding, the look of an employer dealing with a confused employee. Maria, I know you want to help Rebecca. We all do. But Dr. Harrison warned me that Rebecca might try to convince people that her delusions are real. She might even convince people to believe they saw things that didn't happen. The implication was clear. Mrs. Whitmore had somehow convinced Maria to lie about the padlock, or had convinced Maria that she'd seen something that wasn't there. "I know what I saw," Maria said quietly. "Of course you do," Mr. Whitmore replied. "And I'm not questioning your honesty, but trauma can affect memory. Stress can make us see things differently than they actually were." Detective Coleman closed her notebook. "I think I have everything I need for now. Ms. Santos, thank you for your cooperation." As Detective Coleman prepared to leave, Maria made a decision that could change everything. "Detective," she said, "there's something else." Both Detective Coleman and Mr. Whitmore looked at her. "I cleaned Mr. Whitmore's computer. His personal computer in the study. I see his internet history, his emails." Mr. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but Maria saw his hands clench into fists. "What about his internet history?" Detective Coleman asked. "Last week he was researching hypothermia, how long it takes, what happens to pregnant women, how to make it look like an accident." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. "Maria," Mr. Whitmore said very quietly, "that's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Maria replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "It's what I saw." Detective Coleman reopened her notebook. "Ms. Santos, would you be willing to show me this computer? To point out exactly what you saw?" "Yes." Mr. Whitmore stepped forward. "Detective, Maria is obviously upset about tonight's events. She's also in a very vulnerable position regarding her immigration status. I think she's trying to protect herself by creating a story that supports Rebecca's delusions." "Actually," Maria said, pulling out her phone, "I take pictures." Mr. Whitmore went very still. "Pictures?" Detective Coleman asked. "When I clean the computer, sometimes I see things that worry me, things about Mrs. Whitmore. So I take pictures, in case something happens." Maria scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. Browser history showing searches for hypothermia in pregnancy, symptoms of hypothermia, how long does hypothermia take, and accidental hypothermia death. All from the past 2 weeks, all from Mr. Whitmore's computer. She handed the phone to Detective Coleman. Mr. Whitmore's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "You have no right to spy on me in my own home," he said, his voice cold and dangerous. "I have every right to protect Mrs. Whitmore," Maria replied, "and I have every right to document evidence of a crime." Detective Coleman studied the photos carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, can you explain these searches?" Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm again, controlled. "I was researching hypothermia because of Rebecca's episodes," he said. "She's been talking about feeling cold all the time, about being trapped in cold places. I wanted to understand if her delusions could put her in actual physical danger." It was a plausible explanation, a caring husband researching his wife's symptoms. But Maria knew it was a lie, and now she had the courage to say so. "That's not true," she said. "The searches were before Mrs. Whitmore started talking about feeling cold. They were before her so-called episodes." "You're mistaken about the timing," Mr. Whitmore said. "No, I take pictures with dates and times. I can prove when the searches happen." Maria scrolled to another photo. The browser history with timestamps. The searches had begun 3 weeks ago, before Mrs. Whitmore had started seeing Dr. Harrison. Before the supposed episodes. Before anyone could have known that she would develop a fear of cold places. Unless someone was planning to create that fear. Detective Coleman looked from Maria to Mr. Whitmore and back again. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I think we need to continue this conversation at the station." The hospital room felt like a sanctuary compared to the wine cellar, but Becca couldn't shake the feeling that she was still trapped. Dr. Harrison sat in the corner, making notes on a tablet. Jonathan held her hand, stroking her fingers with gentle concern. And Detective Coleman stood by the window, studying her phone with an expression that had grown increasingly troubled over the past hour. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Coleman said suddenly, "I just received some interesting information from the scene." "What kind of information?" Jonathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Your chef, Maria Santos, showed me some photos she took of internet searches on your personal computer. Searches about hypothermia in pregnancy. Would you like to explain those? Becca felt Jonathan's hand tighten on hers, just for a moment. Then he relaxed and smiled. Of course, I was researching Rebecca's symptoms. She's been complaining about feeling cold constantly, even in warm rooms. I wanted to understand if that could be dangerous for the baby. Dr. Harrison looked up from her tablet. That's consistent with what we've discussed in our sessions, Rebecca. Your preoccupation with temperature, your fears about being cold. But Becca didn't remember feeling cold all the time. She remembered being comfortable in their house, which was always perfectly climate controlled. When did I start complaining about being cold? She asked Jonathan. About 3 weeks ago, right around the time you started seeing Dr. Harrison. Detective Coleman was scrolling through something on her phone. According to Miss Santos, these searches began 3 weeks ago, before your first appointment with Dr. Harrison. That's not possible, Dr. Harrison said smoothly. I've been treating Rebecca for 6 weeks. Actually, Detective Coleman continued, I just verified with your office. Rebecca Morrison Whitmore has no appointment history with your practice. No insurance claims, no billing records. The room went silent. Dr. Harrison's composed expression flickered for just a moment. There must be some confusion with the records. I can have my staff. Dr. Harrison, Detective Coleman interrupted. What's your license number? I'm sorry? Your medical license number. I'd like to verify your credentials. Dr. Harrison stood up abruptly. I don't appreciate having my professional qualifications questioned. Then you won't mind providing your license number. Instead of answering, Dr. Harrison moved toward the door. I think this interview is over. Actually, Detective Coleman said, stepping in front of the door, I think it's just beginning. Becca looked from Dr. Harrison to Jonathan, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. You're not a real doctor, she said to Dr. Harrison. You're working with him. Jonathan's expression remained calm, but his grip on her hand had become painful. Sweetheart, you're confused. Dr. Harrison is trying to help you. No, Becca said, pulling her hand away from his. She's helping you. You've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Dr. Hayes, who had been quietly observing from the other side of the bed, spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore, what do you remember about your medical history? Before tonight? I've been seeing Dr. Martinez for prenatal care. My regular doctor is Dr. Peterson at Family Medicine Associates. When was your last appointment with Dr. Martinez? Becca tried to remember. 2 weeks ago. Everything was normal. No complications, no concerns about memory or confusion. Dr. Hayes made notes. I can verify that with Dr. Martinez in the morning. Detective Coleman, Jonathan said, my wife is clearly having a breakdown. She needs psychiatric help, not police interrogation. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I think your wife is the sanest person in this room. Detective Coleman put her phone away. Ms. Santos has provided some very compelling evidence. Maria is an illegal immigrant who will say anything to avoid deportation. Maria Santos has a valid work visa. I checked, and her photographs of your computer searches are very interesting. Becca felt a surge of hope. Maria had believed her. Maria had found proof. What photographs? Jonathan's voice was still calm, but there was an edge now. Searches for hypothermia symptoms, survival times, methods of inducing hypothermia. All from your personal computer. All from the weeks leading up to tonight. Those searches were research for killing your wife, Detective Coleman finished, along with the fake psychiatrist, the isolation from family and friends, and the elaborate setup tonight. Dr. Harrison made another move toward the door. This time, Detective Coleman didn't stop her. Actually, please leave, Detective Coleman said. I'm sure Mr. Whitmore will want to call a real lawyer now. As Dr. Harrison hurried out, Becca felt a weight lifting from her chest. The fake psychiatrist was gone. The gaslighting had stopped. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could trust her own thoughts. Jonathan, she said quietly, why did you want to kill me? He looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, the mask finally dropping. You're worth more to me dead than alive, he said simply. The honesty was almost refreshing after weeks of lies and manipulation. The insurance policy, Becca realized. You increased my life insurance 6 months ago. $20 million. Plus the prenatal rider for the baby, another $5 million if you both die. Dr. Hayes gasped. Detective Coleman was already reaching for her handcuffs. But why now? Becca asked. Why not wait until after the baby's born? Jonathan's smile was chilling. Because if you died in childbirth, there might be an investigation, medical malpractice claims, too many variables. But a tragic accident with a pregnant woman who's been having mental health issues? Much cleaner. You've been planning this since I got pregnant. I've been planning this since I married you. The pregnancy just provided better optics. Detective Coleman stepped forward. Jonathan Whitmore, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As she read him his rights, Jonathan maintained that cold smile. You'll never prove it, he said to Becca. Maria's testimony won't hold up in court. The computer searches can be explained. And you're still just a confused pregnant woman with memory problems. But Detective Coleman was smiling now too. Mr. Whitmore, you made one critical mistake. What's that? You confessed, in front of multiple witnesses. Jonathan's expression finally changed. The realization that he'd just destroyed his own defense hitting him all at once. This entire conversation has been recorded. Detective Coleman continued, holding up her phone. Your wife's hospital room is considered a potential crime scene. Everything said here is admissible evidence. As the uniformed officers led Jonathan away in handcuffs, he looked back at Becca one last time. You won't survive this, he said quietly. Even if I go to prison, you won't survive what comes next. The threat sent a chill through Becca that had nothing to do with temperature. What does he mean? She asked Detective Coleman. I don't know, but we're going to find out. After Jonathan was gone, Dr. Hayes checked Becca's vital signs again. How are you feeling? She asked. Scared, Becca admitted. If he's been planning this for months, if he's been that methodical, what else has he done? What other safeguards has he put in place? Dr. Hayes sat down beside the bed. Mrs. Whitmore, what do you know about your husband's previous relationships? He was married once before. His first wife died in a car accident about 5 years ago. Do you know the details of that accident? Becca tried to remember what Jonathan had told her. She was driving home from a friend's house late at night, hit a tree in the rain. Detective Coleman was making notes again. What was her name? Catherine Whitmore. Did they have children? No. Jonathan said they'd been trying, but it never happened. Dr. Hayes and Detective Coleman exchanged a look. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said carefully, I think we need to take a much closer look at your husband's history. As the implications of that statement sank in, Becca placed her hands on her belly and felt the baby kick. Strong, healthy, alive. They were both alive. Against all odds, despite Jonathan's careful planning, they had survived. But Detective Coleman was right. They needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with, because something told Becca that Jonathan Whitmore's crimes didn't begin and end with her. 3 days after her rescue from the wine cellar, Becca sat in Detective Coleman's office, staring at a stack of files that grew thicker by the hour. Her mother, Grace Morrison, sat beside her, having flown in from Phoenix the moment she received Becca's call. You were right about everything, Detective Coleman said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. Your mother does live in Phoenix. She never moved back to Chicago. Your parents divorced 18 months ago, exactly like you remembered. Grace reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Honey, I'm so sorry. When you stopped calling, when you didn't answer my emails, I thought you were just busy with the pregnancy. I never stopped calling you, Mom. I tried to call you dozens of times. The number Jonathan gave me always went to voicemail. That wasn't my number, Grace said. I never changed my number after the move. Detective Coleman opened the first file. We found a burner phone in your husband's study. The voicemail your mother heard was actually a recording of your voice, saying you were too busy to talk, but that you'd call back soon. Becca felt sick. The level of deception, the careful planning, the complete control over her reality. How long has he been doing this? She asked. We're still piecing it together, but at least 6 months, maybe longer. Detective Coleman opened another file. Tell me about your sister, Jenny. My sister? Becca's heart raced. She lives in San Diego. She's a teacher. Why? Because according to public records, you do have a sister named Jennifer Morrison. She lives in San Diego and teaches 4th grade. Then why doesn't she exist in my phone? Why don't I remember talking to her? Grace spoke up quietly. Because Jonathan intercepted all her calls and emails too. Jenny's been worried sick about you. She thought you'd cut her out of your life because of something she said about Jonathan. What did she say about him? She never trusted him, said he was too controlling, too possessive. She was afraid he was isolating you. She was right. Jenny had been right from the beginning. Detective Coleman opened the thickest file. Mrs. Whitmore, we need to talk about your husband's previous marriages. Marriages, plural? Jonathan Whitmore has been married 4 times. You're his 4th wife. The room seemed to spin. 4 times? He told me he'd only been married once before. Wife number 1 was Sarah Mitchell. They married when he was 26. She died in a hiking accident 6 months after the wedding. Fell off a cliff during what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Detective Coleman spread out photographs and documents. Wife number 2 was Linda Thompson. Married her 3 years later. She died in a house fire 18 months into the marriage. The fire started in the middle of the night while Jonathan was supposedly out of town on business. Becca's hands trembled as she looked at the photographs. Young women, all with dark hair and similar builds, all smiling in wedding photos that looked eerily familiar. Wife number 3 was Catherine Brennan. The car accident you mentioned. But it wasn't just any car accident, Mrs. Whitmore. The brake lines had been cut. Oh my God, Grace whispered. Catherine was 8 months pregnant when she died. Detective Coleman continued. Just like Jonathan planned for you to be. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. Jonathan didn't just kill his wives. He killed them when they were most vulnerable, when they were carrying his children. But why? Becca asked. If he wanted children, why kill them when they were pregnant? Detective Coleman opened another file. Because he never wanted children, he wanted life insurance payouts. Each wife had progressively larger policies. Sarah's was for $500,000. Linda's was for $2 million. Catherine's was for $10 million. And mine? $25 million, including the prenatal rider. The number hit Becca like a physical blow. She was worth more dead than 3 previous women combined. But that's not the worst part, Detective Coleman said grimly. Becca couldn't imagine what could be worse than learning her husband was a serial killer who specialized in murdering pregnant women. What's worse than that? We think there might be more victims. Women who were dating him but never made it to marriage. Women who disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Detective Coleman spread out more photographs. Amanda Cross, your former best friend. She didn't go to Europe, Mrs. Whitmore. She's been missing for 3 weeks. Becca stared at Amanda's photo. Her college roommate, her maid of honor, the woman who had tried to warn her about Jonathan's controlling behavior. Missing? She was supposed to meet Jonathan for coffee to discuss concerns about your mental health. That was the last time anyone saw her. The room was getting smaller, the walls closing in. How many people had died because of her? How many people had Jonathan eliminated to maintain his control over her life? Detective, Grace said, is my daughter safe now? She's safer with him in custody, but we're still investigating the full scope of his crimes, and there's something else you need to know. Detective Coleman pulled out a final file. This one was marked with official federal seals. The FBI has been investigating Jonathan Whitmore for 2 years. They suspected him in Catherine's death, but they couldn't prove anything. Your case has finally given them the evidence they needed. A knock on the door interrupted them. A young officer entered carrying an evidence box. Detective Coleman, we found these in a hidden safe behind the wine cellar. The officer set the box on the desk and opened it. Inside were personal items that clearly belonged to different women. Wedding rings, driver's licenses, photographs, and something that made Becca gasp. Her grandmother's earrings, the ones she thought she'd lost months ago. He's been taking trophies, Detective Coleman said, from all of his victims. Becca picked up the earrings with shaking hands. He told me I must have misplaced them. He helped me look for them. Look at this, the officer said, pulling out a driver's license. Amanda Cross. The date on the license was from 3 weeks ago, the day she supposedly left for Europe. We found her car this morning, Detective Coleman said gently, at the bottom of Miller's Pond, with Amanda inside. Becca doubled over, nausea overwhelming her. Amanda was dead. Her best friend was dead because she had tried to help her. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said, I know this is overwhelming, But we need you to help us. You might be the key to identifying other victims. How can I help? I didn't even know what my own husband was. Because you lived with him. You observed his patterns. You might remember things that seemed insignificant at the time, but are actually evidence. Grace rubbed her daughter's back as Becca struggled to process everything. The other women he dated, Becca said slowly, before he married me. I remember him mentioning a few of them. Can you remember names? There was someone named Rachel. He said she moved to Seattle for work. And Jennifer, no, that's my sister's name. It was Jessica. He said she decided to go back to her ex-boyfriend. Detective Coleman was writing frantically. Anyone else? Monica. He said she got a job overseas, teaching English in South Korea. Becca paused, a memory surfacing. He kept photos of all of them. Said it helped him remember the good times. Photos, where? In his study, in a box in his desk drawer. The officer was already on his radio, dispatching a team to search Jonathan's study more thoroughly. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Coleman said, you might have just helped us identify victims we didn't even know existed. But instead of feeling proud, Becca felt only crushing guilt. All those women, all those lives cut short because a monster had learned that he could profit from love and then destroy it. Detective, she said quietly, how did no one catch him? How did he get away with this for so long? Because he was very good at choosing vulnerable women. Women who were isolated, who didn't have strong support systems. Women who were easy to gaslight and control. Women like me. Women like you, Detective Coleman agreed. But you survived, Mrs. Whitmore. You fought back. You trusted your instincts even when everyone was telling you that you were crazy. Maria saved me. If she hadn't come back for her keys, Maria was brave, but you were the one who stayed calm in that freezer. You were the one who found the crowbar. You were the one who kept yourself and your baby alive long enough to be rescued. Dr. Hayes had arrived and was checking Becca's blood pressure and heart rate. The stress of the revelations was taking a toll. I think that's enough for today, Dr. Hayes said firmly. Mrs. Whitmore needs rest. But as they prepared to leave, Detective Coleman had one more thing to show her. This came for you this morning, she said, handing Becca an envelope. The return address was from a women's prison in Oregon. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Rebecca, I saw the news about your husband's arrest. I want you to know that you're not alone. My name is Lisa Campbell, and I was married to Jonathan Whitmore 12 years ago. I was his first wife, not Sarah Mitchell. I survived because I got suspicious and left him before he could carry out whatever he was planning. But I never reported him because I had no proof, and he threatened to destroy me if I ever talked. I've been living under a different name ever since. But when I saw what happened to you, I knew I had to come forward. I can testify about his patterns, his methods, his psychology. You were brave enough to fight back. Now I'm going to be brave enough to help put him away forever. You saved not just yourself, but probably dozens of future victims. With admiration and solidarity, Lisa Becca read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. There's another survivor, she said, and there will be more, Detective Coleman replied. Your courage is going to inspire other women to come forward. Women who escaped, women who suspected, women who have information that can help us build the strongest possible case. As they left the police station, Becca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not just for justice, but for the future. For herself and her unborn daughter. For all the women who would never have to face Jonathan Whitmore's particular brand of evil. He had tried to erase her from existence. Instead, she was going to be the reason he never hurt anyone again. 6 weeks later, Becca stood in the witness box of the federal courthouse, her hand on the Bible, 9 months pregnant and resolute. The courtroom was packed with media, law enforcement, and family members of Jonathan's victims. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The clerk asked. I do, Becca said firmly. She looked directly at Jonathan, sitting at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman he pretended to be. His eyes met hers with that same cold calculation she'd seen in the hospital room. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Mrs. Whitmore, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court what happened on the evening of October 15? Becca took a deep breath and began to tell her story. Not the version Jonathan had tried to make her believe, but the truth, her truth. She testified about the systematic isolation, the gradual erosion of her independence, the fake psychiatrist, and the manufactured mental health crisis. She testified about the wine cellar, the padlock, the 3 hours of terror in sub-freezing temperatures while pregnant. She testified about Jonathan's confession in the hospital room, his casual admission that she was worth more to him, dead than alive. And did there come a time, the prosecutor asked, when you learned about your husband's previous marriages? Yes. Detective Coleman showed me files on Sarah Mitchell, Linda Thompson, and Catherine Brennan. All of them died under suspicious circumstances. All of them were young women he had married and then killed for insurance money. The defense attorney objected, but the judge overruled him. The pattern evidence was admissible. Mrs. Whitmore, were you aware of any other victims? Yes. My best friend Amanda Cross was murdered because she was trying to help me, and we discovered that several other women Jonathan had dated had disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Becca's voice remained steady throughout her testimony, even when the defense attorney tried to suggest she was delusional, even when he implied that her pregnancy hormones had affected her memory. But when Jonathan's lawyer asked her why anyone should believe her over her successful, respected husband, Becca's composure finally cracked. Not with tears or hysteria, but with anger. Because I'm not the only one, she said, her voice rising. Because there are other survivors who have come forward. Because there's forensic evidence. Because there are photographs of his internet searches about how to kill pregnant women. She turned to face the jury directly. But mostly because I'm here. I'm alive. I survived what he planned for me, and I'm not going to let him hurt anyone else. The defense attorney sat down, apparently recognizing that he was only making things worse for his client. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Maria testified about the padlock and the computer searches. Detective Coleman presented the physical evidence. The forensic accountant detailed the insurance policies and financial motives. But perhaps most damaging was the testimony of Lisa Campbell, the first wife who had escaped. Lisa took the stand wearing a simple black dress, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had spent 12 years in hiding, but she spoke with quiet authority about Jonathan's methods. He doesn't start with violence, she testified. He starts with charm. He makes you feel like the most special woman in the world. Then gradually, so slowly you don't notice, he takes control of everything. Your money, your friends, your family, your reality. Can you describe his pattern with insurance policies? The prosecutor asked. He would suggest increasing coverage for security. He'd handle all the paperwork, make all the payments. By the time you realized how much you were worth dead, you were completely dependent on him for everything. Why didn't you report your suspicions after you left? Lisa's voice wavered slightly. Because I had no proof. Because he was wealthy and connected, and I was just an ex-wife with a story no one would believe. Because he threatened to destroy me if I ever spoke up. What changed your mind? Lisa looked directly at Becca. When I saw what happened to Rebecca, I realized that my silence had enabled him to keep killing. I realized that my cowardice had cost other women their lives. The defense called character witnesses who testified about Jonathan's philanthropy, his business success, his reputation in the community. But their testimony felt hollow against the mountain of evidence and the powerful words of the survivors. When it came time for closing arguments, the prosecutor didn't need to resort to emotion or dramatics. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, this case is about a man who turned marriage into a murder weapon, who used love as a tool for killing, who targeted vulnerable women, isolated them, and then eliminated them for profit. She gestured to the evidence table, covered with photographs, documents, and personal effects from the victims. The defendant didn't just kill these women. He erased them. He made them disappear so completely that some of them weren't even recognized as murder victims until now. The prosecutor paused in front of the jury box. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated Rebecca Whitmore. He thought she was weak, controllable, dispensable. Instead, she was strong enough to survive his attack and brave enough to fight back. She turned to look at Jonathan. The defendant thought he was smarter than everyone else, thought he could manipulate reality so completely that no one would ever question his version of events. But truth has a way of surfacing, and justice has a way of finding its mark. The defense attorney's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt, on the possibility that the deaths were coincidental, that Becca's accusations were the product of pregnancy-induced paranoia, but his words fell flat in the face of the evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a clear, steady voice. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The list of guilty verdicts went on and on. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and under federal RICO statutes, murder in the first degree for Amanda Cross. As each verdict was read, Becca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Not just the weight of fear or trauma, but the weight of all the women who hadn't survived to see this moment. When the judge sentenced Jonathan to life in prison without the possibility of parole, he finally lost his composure. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted as the bailiffs moved to restrain him. "I'm innocent. She's lying. They're all lying." But his protests fell on deaf ears. Justice had finally caught up with Jonathan Whitmore. As the courtroom erupted in cheers and tears, Becca placed her hands on her belly and felt her daughter kick. Strong and healthy and very much alive. "It's over, baby girl," she whispered. "You're safe now." Detective Coleman approached as the crowd began to disperse. "How do you feel?" she asked. Becca thought about the question. How did she feel? "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely free." "What's next for you?" Becca looked around the courtroom at the faces of the investigators, the family members of victims, the reporters who would tell this story to the world. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else," she said. "I'm going to start a foundation for women who are being controlled and isolated, for women who think they're going crazy but are actually being gaslit, for women who need someone to believe them when no one else will." Detective Coleman smiled. "I think that's exactly what the world needs." As Becca left the courthouse, she passed a group of women holding signs, survivors of domestic violence, who had come to show their support. Women who understood what it meant to fight back against a system designed to silence them. One of the signs read, "She believed herself when no one else would." That, Becca thought, was exactly right. She had believed herself. She had trusted her instincts. She had fought for her truth even when everyone around her was insisting she was crazy. And in the end, that had made all the difference. 18 months later, Becca stood in the nursery of her new apartment, watching her daughter Emma play with building blocks on a sunny Tuesday morning. The apartment was small but bright, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. It was nothing like the mansion she'd shared with Jonathan, but it was theirs, safe and secure and filled with love. Emma babbled happily as she stacked blocks, occasionally looking up at her mother with Jonathan's dark eyes but Becca's determined chin. At 15 months old, she was walking and talking and completely unafraid of the world around her. "Mama," Emma said, holding up a block. Her first word, spoken at 11 months old in this very room. "Yes, baby, that's a block," Becca replied, settling down on the carpet beside her daughter. The doorbell rang, and Becca checked the security monitor before answering. Maria Santos stood on the doorstep, carrying a covered casserole dish and wearing a smile. "Maria," Becca said, opening the door wide. "Come in." Maria had become more than an employee over the past year and a half. She was a friend, a surrogate aunt to Emma, and the director of operations for the Rebecca Morrison Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention. "How did the meeting go this morning?" Maria asked, setting the casserole on the kitchen counter. "Really well. We got approval for the new safe house. It'll be our 3rd location." The foundation had grown beyond Becca's wildest expectations. What had started as a simple idea to help women escape controlling relationships had become a comprehensive network of resources, safe houses, legal aid, and counseling services. They specialized in helping women who were being gaslighted, isolated, and psychologically controlled. Women who were told they were crazy when they were actually being systematically abused. "And the documentary?" Maria asked. "It premieres next month. The producer thinks it'll help bring even more attention to coercive control as a form of domestic violence." The documentary had been difficult to participate in. Reliving those months of manipulation and terror, talking about Amanda's death, confronting the full scope of Jonathan's crimes. But Becca knew it would help other women recognize the warning signs. Emma toddled over to Maria, arms raised for a hug. Maria swept her up and spun her around, making her giggle. "How's our little fighter today?" Maria asked. "Strong," Becca replied, watching her daughter with pride. "Getting stronger every day." There was a knock at the door. This time it was Detective Coleman, now retired from the police force and working as an investigator for the foundation. "Any news?" Becca asked as Coleman entered. "Two pieces of good news. First, the Portland Police Department confirmed another cold case. Rebecca Patterson, who dated Jonathan briefly 7 years ago. They found her car in the Columbia River. The case is being reopened as a homicide. It was good news in the sense that it would bring closure to another family, though it meant another life lost to Jonathan's evil. And the second piece of news? Lisa Campbell is getting married. That brought a genuine smile to Becca's face. Lisa, the first wife who had escaped and hidden for 12 years, was finally living openly again. She'd started using her real name, reconnected with her family, and found love with a man who understood her history and supported her healing. "That's wonderful," Becca said. "She deserves happiness." "We all do," Coleman replied. Emma chose that moment to say her newest word, one she'd learned just last week. "Safe," she said clearly, looking at her mother. Becca had been teaching her basic concepts: safe and unsafe, good touch and bad touch. Trust your feelings. Tell mama if anything feels wrong. At 15 months old, Emma was already learning lessons that could protect her for the rest of her life. The three women spent the afternoon playing with Emma, discussing foundation business, and enjoying the simple pleasure of an ordinary day. No fear, no hypervigilance, no checking and rechecking locks. As evening approached, Maria and Coleman prepared to leave. "Dinner tomorrow?" Maria asked. "I'm making pupusas." "Emma would love that," Becca replied. "She's been asking for Maria's food all week." After they left, Becca began Emma's bedtime routine. Bath, pajamas, story time in the rocking chair by the window. Tonight's book was about a brave little girl who went on adventures and always found her way home. Emma listened intently, sometimes pointing at the pictures and naming the colors. "Mama," Emma said as Becca tucked her into her crib, "sing song." Becca had been singing the same lullaby every night since Emma was born, a song about being brave and strong and loved. "You are loved, you are safe, you are braver than you know. You are strong, you are wise, you will learn and you will grow. Close your eyes, rest your heart, let the dreams begin to flow. You are loved, you are safe, and that's all you need to know." Emma's eyes drifted closed, her breathing becoming slow and even. Becca stood by the crib for a few minutes, watching her daughter sleep. 15 months ago, she'd been trapped in a freezer, fighting for both their lives. Tonight, Emma slept peacefully in a home filled with love and safety. The transformation felt miraculous. Becca checked the locks on the front door before settling down with a cup of tea and her laptop. She still checked locks more than most people, but now it felt like reasonable caution rather than paranoid compulsion. She was working on her book, a memoir about surviving coercive control and rebuilding her life. The publisher thought it could help other women, and several major book clubs had already expressed interest. But tonight, instead of writing about the past, she found herself thinking about the future. Next month, the foundation would open its fourth safe house. Next year, they hoped to expand into 3 more states. She'd been invited to speak at conferences, to train law enforcement officers, to consult on legislation about coercive control. More importantly, she'd been invited to be Emma's mother for the rest of her life, to raise a daughter who would grow up knowing her own worth, trusting her own instincts, and never accepting less than she deserved. A daughter who would never doubt her own reality because someone else found it inconvenient. Becca's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a woman named Sarah who had escaped her controlling husband 3 months ago with the foundation's help. "Got the job. Starting Monday. Thank you for helping me believe I could do this." Messages like this arrived regularly now. Women who had found their voices, reclaimed their independence, built new lives free from fear and control. Each message was a reminder that Jonathan's plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing her, he had given her a platform. Instead of destroying her, He had forged her into someone strong enough to help others. Becca checked on Emma one more time before going to bed. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, one small hand curled around her favorite stuffed animal. "Sweet dreams, little one," Becca whispered. "Tomorrow's going to be another beautiful day." As she settled into her own bed, Becca reflected on how much her definition of safety had changed. It used to mean locks and alarms and constant vigilance. Now it meant community and support and the knowledge that she was not alone. It meant having people who believed her, people who would notice if she disappeared, people who valued her life and her voice. It meant raising a daughter who would never have to wonder if she was losing her mind, because she would always have people around her who confirmed her reality instead of distorting it. Most of all, it meant knowing that she had survived the worst thing she could imagine, and that she was not just stronger for it, but more compassionate, more determined, and more alive than she had ever been. The last thing Becca heard before drifting off to sleep was the sound of Emma breathing peacefully in the next room, the sound of life continuing, of the future unfolding, of two survivors who had beaten the odds and would never stop fighting for others to do the same. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women to help, new stories to tell. But tonight they were safe, they were home, they were free, and that was more than enough. If stories like this grip you as much as they grip me, smash that like button. It helps more people discover these incredible tales. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Rebecca should have done differently, and don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our psychological thrillers. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.